Can you guys hear me? Are our mics on? Yes?
Testing. Yep.
Testing. I am so excited to be talking to you. As we just heard, Serial Season 3 was about a year we spent watching cases in the felony courthouse in Cuyahoga County in Cleveland. Their main courthouse is in Cleveland. And Ordinary Injustice your book was a huge influence on that because of the way you so just neatly flicked aside the kind of bad apple notion that it's sort of, we can pinpoint these certain bad actors, and then if we get rid of those people, it's going to be okay. You just showed how nicely it was like this sort of soup of factors. And so when I saw that you were doing Measures for Justice, and we found out about Measures for Justice, and I was like, why would she do that? Like, she's a writer and a reporter, and you're an attorney, right, as well, right? You're like a really smart person. So I was like, why with the numbers? No, I mean, which was like, I was so happy about it, but I was like, why did you choose this to do with yourself?
Well, the whole origin of the book and really the organization began in this one county called Quitman County, Mississippi, and it's about an hour and 15 minutes south of Memphis. It's in the Delta, and you walk into this courthouse, and it's, you know, quote unquote trial day, and there's supposed to be trials and people lined up, you know, just like there are in places across the country, and there was like nobody there. And I went down to the court clerk, and there was this woman there, and her name was Miss Brenda Wiggs. And I said to Miss Wiggs, where is everybody? I thought today was trial day, and I was gonna, you know, report on this for my book. And she said, you wanna know? I'll show you. And she pointed to this list of cases above her desk, and they were handwritten cases. And she said these cases were people who were charged in a lower court called Justice Court, and they were bound over to circuit court. And she said, by law, the district attorney has to present all of these cases you know, to the grand jury, and the people in the grand jury can decide, yes, it's a good case, it should go forward, or no, it shouldn't, but he never presents anything. I go, well, what do you do with the list once you're done? And she says, I take it down and I put up another list. So I said, can I have these lists? And so I took the list and I Xeroxed them at her, in her little office, and I started to like gather all the files, and I went and I talked to the police and the sheriffs, and I tried to figure out what were the missing cases. And what I found was that entire categories of cases had just disappeared. I met this woman, and she had been beaten up horribly by her boyfriend underneath a bridge with a tire iron. He just beat her, and there were pictures in this file of her with like blood on her face, and she had been in the hospital for 3 days. She couldn't work because he had beaten her so badly, and her daughter, the whole beating happened with her daughter and her niece, who were young, I think they were 5 and 7, just watching the whole thing inside a locked car. And I went to the woman and I said, you know, do you know why your case wasn't prosecuted? And she said, I have no idea. So I went back to Miss Wiggs. I said, Miss Wiggs, why wasn't this case prosecuted? And she said, let me look. And she looks back in her really, you know, primitive little computer, and then she went into this back hutch, and she saw these huge bound volumes with gold embossed letters on it, and she said, he hasn't prosecuted a domestic violence case in 21 years. Oh, and I said, are you sure? And so we looked again, and so then I went to the prosecutor, and I said, do you realize you haven't prosecuted a domestic violence case in 21 years? And he said, has it been that long? And then I went to the other counties around, right? And I said, do you prosecute domestic violence? And it turned out they all have, but it was so, like you said, it was so hard to just get that one data point. Like, do you prosecute domestic violence? You would think that they would be able to look, and they couldn't even figure that out. So then I started saying, well, why don't we compare counties and see, like, don't you want to know how you're doing? How do the people know? And if you ask the people in Quitman County, they also, oh, no, domestic violence, that doesn't get prosecuted. But the question is what are the patterns and why we can't see them? And so that was really, and so that was the conclusion of the book, and then it all kind of, you know, came from there.
You're a natural data collector. You're such a good storyteller. Yeah, like
But that's the ultimate thing. The ultimate thing, and this is why I know I love your work so much, is, I'm serious. I know, it really is, because it's the ultimate 1-2 punch, is data with a story.
Can I just say, I can't tell you, I was like a lonely puppy at the window with the Measures for Justice website, because there were 6, you started with 6 states analyzed. Ohio was not one of them. But I kept thinking, like, any day now she's going to put Ohio up there. I kept clicking and clicking. But so there were.
Can I just say one thing about Ohio? We have to go. So Ohio, all right, so we've mapped the country.
Yeah.
And there are certain states that you got to do. Like, you got to do New York, right? We're working on it. We're doing 20 states by 2020. We were really lucky that we could do Florida. We have to do California, and you got to do Ohio. So we've mapped the country into orange, which means the data's, not that great and hard to get and hard to do. Yellow and green, and Ohio's yellow.
Wait, what's the other one? Yellow?
Green is a go.
Yeah, green's good. What's yellow mean?
Yellow means it's possible most of the counties you could get if you went county to county, but there's no centralized database.
Oh, yeah.
So you could try and do it. But I've had my eye on Ohio. It needs.
Not fast enough, sister. Anyway, I just wanted, I thought of you and your work so many times, and I know we called you during the season. I think we called you guys for help. But I just want to play this one clip to give an example of, like, sort of what you're up against. So this is a clip of me talking to, wasn't in the series, but it's a clip of me talking to a judge in Cleveland. And I was trying to figure out, I was doing a story about this young woman who was in a bar fight. And in the midst of the fight, she accidentally whacks a cop, and so she gets charged with felony assault on a peace officer. But she was young. She had gotten a bail of $5,000, which I thought was a lot. It sounded like a lot to me. So I was asking this judge, what is that amount, that $5,000? What is the rationale for that figure? What is that figure based on? And then can we just play the clip?
Based on what we've always done, not on anything having to do with her, okay? See what I'm saying?
But aren't you looking at her record?
Yeah, you are. But I'm saying what you're looking at is, okay, she's charged with assault on a police officer. That can't be good. And and then she's had other criminal activity. Okay, that can't be good. This looks like a $5,000 case.
And that number, I know you're saying it's based on what we've always done, but what we've always done, what is that based on?
Nothing. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
Somebody it must have an origin story.
Oh, it doesn't have an origin story. That's what I'm telling you. That it doesn't have an origin story. It's always been your gut level feeling. If there was anything that you could hang your hat on, then that would make sense. This makes no sense.
When you hear him say that stuff, okay, like what comes to mind?
Oh my gosh. Okay. The first thing that comes to mind is this judge in my book who, in Troy, New York, and he gives $25,000 bail to a homeless man for not having a bell on his bike and riding his bike on the sidewalk. And then he does these bails, just these outrageous things all the time. Like, this one guy, he was like, oh, you know what? He always comes and pleads guilty. I'll plead him guilty for him. So he just pleads him guilty. Don't bring him in the court. Just let him go. And it's that kind of degradation. And the reason it happens, okay, where these things, there's no sunlight on them, first of all. And the reason it's allowed to happen is because everybody in the courtroom is sort of slapping each other. They're happy that they get to go home early. They were polite to the defendant in the room. They've got some niceties, some appearance of justice, but no one's really looking about how it's actually working. Because the question is, were his bails appropriate? Does he know? And how do they compare to other justices in other counties? In the case of that judge, why can't we begin to see what they're doing so that people, whether it's the people in the courtroom themselves or people in the communities can say, hey, you know what? It wasn't fair. It happened to me. It's happened to him. Let's do something about this. And that's what's missing, is that sense of agency, that sense of let's do something about this.
It seems like in all of your work from your book, and then also with Measures for Justice, the thing that you seem to be battling sort of across the board is just entrenchment. This idea of a kind of culture of the courthouse. Because I think, certainly from what I observed in some of the reporting I've done, but you must see like in all over the entire country, is like that sort of courthouse culture is where unfairness and injustice kind of like nestles in and gets comfortable. And so it seems like you're saying, like, forget about this, like, this is what we've always done. We need to look at the fundamentals, like, look at the data and figure out what's happening. And one of the questions I have is, it seems like racism is entrenched in our system. We know this, the numbers are out there, there is, it feels like pretty good reporting that's been done, just like across the board, every single outcome is worse for you if you're a person of color. How can data battle racism?
Okay.
Or can it? Maybe
Well,
it can't.
so, first of all, there's an incredible amount of momentum in criminal justice right now. You just heard Ellen say that there's a story every day. This is our moment, and it's been because of people like you who bring these stories out, and also because of these like massive statistics. 1 in 4 Black men are incarcerated. The question is where that macro number comes from. It comes from what happens not just in New York County or Bronx County, but what happens in Erie County and Livingston County and Onondaga County. It happens in all of these little counties, 62 counties of New York. So what you've got to do is look in the counties and begin to look at what the racial disparities are, and when they're big, go in and start to ask questions and say, like, why is this happening? Now, that said, the problem is that people are afraid to look. And that's why I know you said in the beginning, you were like, why is she doing this? And it's because there is so much resistance to wanting to see, to wanting to really look. And that's what people are afraid of. But the funny thing is, there have been people who looked at our data and saw enormous problems, and then often they fix things, and they come back to the people and be like, we did, treat indigent people differently than non-indigent in terms of who got deferred, and we fixed it, and then they look great, It's like, so if people have to stop being afraid. Yeah.
It's like my father used to say, all facts are friendly.
There was this one judge in Wisconsin, and he was so angry at us for being there. And I spent
Like you came knocking on his door, he knew you were coming.
Well, he was an important judge in the state.
They're all important.
That is true. They are all important because they all talk to each other.
Right.
And I remember I was in his chambers, and I was showing him the data early and being like, you see, I'd heard that you were so upset about it. And he looked at it and he said, you can't compare 2 counties. You just can't. It just happens differently from one county to another. It has to do with culture. There's a different culture. You can't compare them. It's like comparing an orange to an apple. And so I said, well, why can't you compare an orange to an apple? Like, why can't you, like, one's orange and bumpy and one's red and smooth. Like, what's wrong with that? Like, why can't you do that? And he looked at me and had, like, smoke coming out of his ears. And he said, because I don't want a tomato in my fruit salad. And so then I was like, what does that mean? And I was thinking about it, and I was like telling Fiona, who's our director of communications, this, and she goes, what does that mean? And I said, it means get out of my state. It's like I don't want everyone to see how we're doing. But he survived, they all survived, and now they're fixing their data. It's all good.
The difficulty we had in Cuyahoga County, the county was a little better. The city of Cleveland it was appalling trying to get even the most basic information. Really, I mean, they don't know their clearance rate for murder cases. They don't know whether crime is going up or down. Literally, like it's bad. And so what you're doing feels impossible to a person like me, just knowing how hard we work to scrape and like claw our way into just some very minimal stuff. And also the discrepancies you'd get. So you'd ask the police department, and then you'd ask the court, and you'd ask the prosecutor. The numbers do not line up in any way, so you have to start all over again with the raw data. Like it just, you're dealing with 3,000 counties. I can't even imagine, and I wanna know your funniest story or weirdest story about where you found data that you didn't think existed or didn't know existed.
We find, I wish I could think of one, but we find like funny, weird things in the data. We have like a channel on Slack where people will say, oh my God, someone just mentioned, the word porcupine in the data or something like that. But we did get this envelope. So basically what we do is we go to counties and we say, hi, I'm Measures for Justice. We rarely FOIA people, which is forcing them to give us data under federal or state law. I mean, rarely do it. We only do it often if they ask us to, because we want to convince them, we want them to be a part of it. But we convinced these prosecutors in Washington to give us data, and they sent us Xeroxes from a steno pad. So like, in other words, they had written things like in cursive handwriting on a little steno pad, and then just like, and here you go, here's my steno pad of all the data, of all the, I was like, this is how you keep it? And that is how it happens in a lot of places in America.
But you guys invented, I mean, you were telling me that you, like when we do it, we do it the dummy way, where we're like, well, I think they probably keep track of like how many assault cases came through. But you invented a whole, just talk about that for a second. I find that so
Well, so there's 3 categories of workers at Measures for Justice. There are like the data researchers, and they have masters and PhDs in criminology, and they work out of our office in Rochester, New York. And then there are the technologists who partnered with them to make it go faster. And then there's like this third category of people that are data outreach. One of the people who founded it is here tonight, Caroline Sarnoff. And basically, they're incredibly charming, like Caroline, and they're out there, and they go and they basically convince people to give the data. And people will say things like, we don't know how to get our data out. We hear that all the time, and we're like, no problem, we've got a technologist. And the technologist comes and what we do is whatever argument they say, we take that argument away.
That's so smart.
So we send the technologist down, or we work with them until they feel safe and comfortable. And we promise, and we do, go back with the analyzed data and give them a first look. And we say to them, look, and this is really interesting. We say, look, if you see any problems with it, we'll fix it. So they get a first pass at it. And the other thing is we say, we'll give the data back to you. Now, this is really interesting. I thought everyone was going to want this clean data back, because we take their mess and we make it into gold. So like you could do analysis.
You're typing up their steno pad, basically.
Yes, we type up their steno pad. And very few people want it back because they don't even have the people to do the analysis on it.
Oh, they're like, this is just a pile of numbers to me. I don't have time to go through this.
Yep.
Oh my God. Oh my God. What is there? What's your biggest, this is a weird question, I guess, but do you have a fear about this data being used? Is there a wrong way to use the data? Do you ever think like, oh, I hope they don't?
Well, okay, that's all we thought about before we released the data. Yeah, and the reason is because there's what they call perverse consequences. And what you don't want to have is, to create, like the way they have in schools where there's so much focus on test scores, let's say. So they take away gym and they take away, whatever. So we wanted to make sure. So we devised the measures with it in mind that it wouldn't get distorted. So we never call out one person or one part of the justice system with the idea that each part, we measure from arrest to post-conviction with the idea that each part of the system is connected to the other. And we also measure the whole system so that everybody can get together and have a conversation and feel like they're not being bad-appled. And then we put a whole bunch of what we call contextual information in, so that it was never that something can be taken out of context. If someone was like, oh, well, that's because we don't have any African Americans. That's why. Well, the context is there. Or that's because we are a poor county. Well, the poverty rate is there. So it's all there. So there's people say, our challenge is we have so much data. It's like drinking from a fire hose, because we've put in all of this context to make sure that it was responsible, and so that the people who worked in the justice system, quite honestly, would feel like we were responsible and they'd give us the data again.
Right. So you are single-handedly responsible for getting both Florida and California to pass legislation.
I wouldn't say.
I know, but this is right. Like, you worked on this. So Florida recently, and then just now, like a minute ago, California now are requiring.
Well, California is trying, which is very weird. When does California follow Florida? This is like the one instance that I think it might happen, because Florida saw our data and they were just like, where did you get this? And it's yours. And then we, as Samantha said, we went down and we explained how we did it and what data they had and they didn't have. And we did something called a data gap analysis. And that was huge, because when people had never been able to see what was actually missing. And it's the same thing as making the invisible visible, right? Like, here's what you're missing. Here's what you don't have. So we did, for California, a data gap report with Stanford Law School, and we showed what data they didn't have, and a legislator grabbed onto it along with the district attorney in San Francisco, and they introduced legislation. It just got through the first committee. It's going to appropriations, so fingers crossed. But others,
I was a little jumping the gun on California.
Jumping the gun, but we're hoping,
okay.
And we've heard that other states are following too. But I mean, and this will be the trend, that states will pass these laws, and you will see so in 20 years, the Sarah who's doing cereal.
I'll be very, very elderly.
Right? Will be able to reach down into the heart of America and be able to see where the disparities are, or there are no disparities, or it'll be a different world, because we'll be able to know the facts.
This is my last question for you, which is, once these states really start seeing themselves as how their courthouses are working, what is the thing do you have a sense, I guess, of what is the biggest misconception they have now that will be debunked kind of by the numbers? Like, what are they going to discover, do you think?
Well, one of the things that I'm really excited about is we're doing 20 states by 2020. And so in 2020, we'll be able to really tell you something about justice in this country. What I think that people are surprised about so far is, there's so much said about race and, racial disparity in the data. It's really about poverty. It's really, if you're a person of means versus somebody who uses a public defender or is indigent, you have a completely different experience from our data. You are, a person of means usually gets diverted, even if they have the same criminal background for the same minor crime, whereas someone who's poor does not. I think they will be surprised by how they have treated poor people over the
Because they're saying, like, well, we have a public defender's office, we have an assignment attorney list, like, we're good, we're covered.
But it's poor people who bear the brunt.
Yeah. I mean, I'm now the third or fourth or fifth person to say this tonight from the stage, but I think this is a huge national service to our whole country, and so I'm just in awe of what you're doing, and I'm so grateful. But personally, I am also hugely grateful, because reporters need you. We need your data. We need what you know to allow us to tell the stories that we need to tell and we want to tell. So I just want to say, from this privileged seat here, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.